right, guys, look who's back on the program, the best Substack in the whole space. You know him from Morning Combat, his own channel where he breaks it down live for us, the live chats, the breakdowns, everything. It's a pleasure to welcome the one and only Luke Thomas in the house. Luke, it's all happening, man. Every time I have you on, the sport of MMA seems to be getting weirder and weirder. The storylines seem to be getting dumber and dumber. There's a few things for us to talk about today. But first things first, man, I want to find out from you as a man yourself who is a Marine, what was your reaction when you saw Tim Kennedy issue a public apology just 18 hours ago for misstating the aspects of his military service? I didn't really understand it as much as some, but one of the key aspects of it was that's talking about being awarded the Bronze Star with Valor, something that apparently never happened. People can actually check out his full statement up on his Instagram channel. On his Instagram page. But for yourself, when you saw that, what was your reaction to him sort of coming out with this whole thing?
Not much of one. I mean, there's two basic problems that I would have, which is that, like, in the military, you can do many, many different things. You can have different jobs. You can be active. You can be reserve. You can be officer. You can be enlisted. And Tim's service, even the realist part of it, was just very distinct from my own. Like, I was in combat arms too, but I was just a reservist. I was in from 1998 until 2004, and I was in an artillery unit, Hotel Battery 314, 4th Mardiv. But what was interesting was some of my detractors bring this up as like some kind of like gotcha, but to me it's like one of the biggest blessings of my life. I never got deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq, and the reason for that is quite simple, which was that this is the Marine Corps that I served in was still living out a post-World War II vision for what warfare looked like, and the Marine Corps artillery section was basically quite redundant. They didn't need it, and in fact, like, after I got out, my unit did get sent to Iraq, but they all got converted to a rifle company, and they did prisoner transport. The Marine Corps just got rid of that version of artillery. I don't know if they converted them back. I'm not sure what the current state of Hotel Battery is, but all of my friends who were still in, who went, had that going. The point I'm trying to tell you is I just lived a completely different military life than Tim, even the versions of Tim's life that are corroborated. It's just totally, totally different. So, like, a lot of it is hard for me to weigh in on because I don't know what that life is like. I don't know what it's like to be an Army Green Beret. I mean, I have a buddy of mine who was one, but he was he was also an officer. Tim was enlisted. Like, it's just a total difference. And so some of it makes it hard to weigh in on just from that standpoint alone. I think the second thing I would say, though, is to the extent that it's true that he is saying that he got a Bronze Star when he didn't, that is like, I mean, that's just textbook stolen valor. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, again, I don't know what the circumstances of the, I don't know. This is not a situation I have followed very closely. I'm aware of it. Even before today, I'm aware that there had been basically that my understanding is the people who went after him were other special forces guys who either served with him or could just tell his story had issues. But pretty simply, these awards are important and difficult to achieve and often come with your life. The highest award you can get in the American military is the Congressional Medal of Honor. A lot of those guys don't ever get it given to them because they're dead. I mean, they give it to them posthumously, right? They don't ever see the day where the president puts it on you. So, the Bronze Star is a little bit less than that, but still a very, very distinguished award. And I'm assuming that what he's saying is true. If he made that up, it's just textbook stolen valor.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, maybe they saw him do that show Hunting Hitler, and they were like, all right, let's look into this guy's credentials.
I think there were, again, this is not a story I followed super closely. I think that, like, he may have done like some media stuff where he was saying things happened, and then other guys who served with him were like, well, that didn't happen. And then I guess it snowballed from there, something like that. There's apparently a couple of guys on YouTube who are former special forces, and I think some of them may have served with Tim that were the ones who kind of spearheaded this. But it's kind of complicated. It seems like even for me, it's inside baseball,
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I mean, right now we're talking about Tim and the medal and him lying, but also it just feels like, the White House front and center, right, in the MMA world lately. And interestingly enough, the perspective from Australia and these other countries that fans are from, being able to watch this back and be like, oh, wow, look at this. like looking at AI graphics of Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler potentially fighting each other in the lawn in the White House, graphic from MMA fighting. But now that it's been a few days for you, and I know those that haven't subscribed to your Substack need to, because you actually wrote a bit of a piece about what this all means and you sort of broke it down very intricately. But for those that haven't checked out that piece, where does it sit with you now, the fact that, hey, we might actually see a UFC card at a part of the White House? It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is I'm not sure I'm the right guy to be asked that question, which isn't to say that I don't have an opinion about it, but I'm pretty confident that my opinion is not going to be what the typical, at least American MMA fan would have. I don't know how this is going to play in other parts of the world. I don't think that they're going to care too much. Maybe they shouldn't. I don't know how it'll play in Australia. I really have no idea. I think if you ask the average American MMA fan, they would be pretty pumped about it. Partly the status of it, right? I mean, this is a sport that was nearly banned, and to go from nearly banned to the South Lawn, essentially, of the White House is, a pretty big journey, right? So that's part of it. But even then, like, I don't think they care so much about that. Just the connotation of what it means, and then, this unusual atmospherics. I think that they probably are pretty happy with it. I would say that most. I mean, I'm sorry that we have to have these conversations, but they just get forced on us by virtue of these decisions, which is, I think the average, again, how it plays internationally is maybe different, but the typical MMA fan, I think, in this country is probably going to be mostly non-political and or leans to the right. Some cases heavily, some cases more lightly. And then again, some of it just not at all. And again, I think those people are probably just going to be pretty pumped, right? They're going to be pumped that this is happening. There's probably some questions about who would be on the card. Because if it's a 4th of July thing and you don't have any American champs, you got Caleb, but who knows what will happen between now and next July. It's just hard to know, like, what Americans would be on there. And so obviously cage fights on the South Lawn, not an obvious connection to the celebration of independence from the British, but putting that aside, I think the thing I would ask people to consider is maybe two things. Everyone in this sport only looks within itself. The amount of groupthink in the sport is insane. The amount of people who all have the same ideas. I've talked about it before, like the monoculture inside MMA is really remarkable. And again, I think within that culture, people are either reasonably happy or maybe even very happy about this. But what I need folks to understand, and you don't have to like what I'm saying, you don't even have to agree, but I'm just going to give you the outside perspective. The outside perspective is that the president of the United States currently is an extremely polarizing figure, and that associating with him so directly will please his supporters for sure, or people, who don't care one way or the other. But for those who don't like him, and I can assure you that is an enormous number, this is a risk. This is a long-term risk. Now, I don't know what will happen long-term, but I don't know if I've ever seen a sports brand certainly a Western sports brand, so nakedly and hardcore turn into any single one political dimension, or political, I should say, affiliation. So obviously, without consideration for what this will do long term to the sport. And again, I want to be very clear about this. I don't know what will happen. It could very well be the case that nothing. There really is no association, or there really is no long term cost to this. But what I need folks to wrap their head around is, like, what is the reputation for people who don't watch MMA about MMA? And the answer is, in this country, it's starting to become toxic. I know that might be a shock to people to hear, or maybe they don't believe me, or they might not care. Again, I can't make anybody take notice of these things. I'm just telling you what's out there. It is very easy to look at what the UFC has done in terms of making this association and saying at the peak of this political movement's ascendancy to be like, well, this is great. Let's have that conversation when it's at its trough, not its peak, and see what that does. The UFC is about to sign a huge television deal, and maybe even Donald Trump was saying this to entice potential, broadcast networks to work even more with them to get like this kind of prize. Who knows? But I think they're going to be fine for the short term, and I think they're going to be fine even for the life of the next deal, which is going to be like a huge deal. Like we all get it. But what happens after that? What happens after that? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think we're going to find out. And It's a risk. It's a risk to take a brand. Let me just finish on this.
Mm-hmm.
The entirety of my fandom, the UFC was about not merely ascendancy, but it was about, we've got something that we know is great and we can convert skeptics into liking it. We can prove people wrong about this. People are wrong about MMA, and we're going to show them this is a sport for everybody, rich, poor, white, black, tall, short, you name it. It's for everybody. And that's not what the pitch is anymore. The pitch is now very explicitly, it's not for you if you're not part of this affiliation. Or again, there's some people who are just pretty non-political about it, but they're fairly small, or relatively small anyway, in number. And the amount of people who will never be into MMA by virtue of doing this is significant. Now, there's something to be said for becoming an identitarian brand and how secure that can be, which is why, again, I don't really know if there are long-term costs. There could very well be not. But it is very, very strange for me in my lifetime to go from watching MMA as a big tent sport to now a pivot away from that to a sport that is for people of like-minded ideological preferences, and they're in. And these are all gambles that they're making. How they will play out, I guess we will see.
It's interesting. When I was talking to Dan Hooker recently, he's just kind of like, MMA used to be really cool. I used to watch all the cards, and now I just feel like it's kind of lame and not cool and blah, blah, blah. And there's a side thing with the White House thing, like all political side aside, where there are people out there that are like, man, it's and by the way, like White House, amazing place, like revered around the world, White House down. We love the movies here in Australia, but there's like kind of like, and I don't want to be disrespectful when I say this, but like there's kind of like a lame aspect to like maybe doing it at the White House as well. Like it kind of, you know what I mean? It's like not as cool anymore. Like, it's at the White House. Like cool.
Nothing makes cool things uncool like politicians. I mean, I don't know how this is even debatable. You know what I mean? Like you can tolerate them. It's fine. Hey, they want to show up. They want to get on camera. They wave. Everyone goes, okay, fine, whatever. That's one thing. All right, we've seen it. I'm sure you've seen Australia. President Obama shows up to NBA games here still. Everyone's like, yeah, whatever. And then everyone moves on. Fine, whatever. But like, a deep association where, it's like literally for them is kind of strange. If I would, I might like to add one more point to this. And again, I don't expect everyone to care. I understand that there's just going to be a range of opinions, and I don't present mine as like the prevailing one or the one that speaks for the audience. In fact, I think I'm probably on an island here for the most part. But I have friends. I live in Washington, D.C. I have friends in Washington, D.C. I have many, many, many friends. I have people who I served with. I have people I went to college with. I have people I went to high school with. I have a lot of people who live up here, and a lot of them lost jobs in the Doge purge and other federal job purges. Some of these guys served in Iraq. A couple of them did several tours. Some of them have, PhDs. Some of them don't come from wealthy families, and many of them lost their jobs. It's very, very difficult for me to understand in a world where the government considers their jobs waste, that there is now money to put cage fights on the lawn of the White House. That is very difficult for me to understand and accept. To me, it seems quite obviously nonsensical, but again, I don't expect the world to care. It's just, I don't know, man. Capital One Arena is not too far from the White House. You could put it there. What would be the issue? Again, I recognize it's not quite as historic in that way, but
Just before we get off this crazy card that could potentially happen next year, what you mentioned, all right, American champions, Kayla Harrison, but if we're like booking this, I know like Conor McGregor threw his hand up, right? So let's just say in a crazy world, someone with Conor McGregor's background is going to be fighting at the White House, outside of fighting. Who do we put him up against, let's say? Because I've got like Chandler here. I've got people saying, well, do we do the Nate Diaz 3 fight, which would be hilarious? Like, imagine that fight being the fight that's at the end. Nate Diaz out there doing his thing. Or I think people are saying, if Max Holloway wins his BMF belt, do we just do like a Max Holloway BMF title fight with Conor McGregor there? Any of those sound good to you, Luke? Or is there one fight that I'm missing here from the equation?
Well, again, this is why I'm not the right guy to ask this question, because if Jon Jones or Conor McGregor never fought again, I'd be totally cool.
Yes.
Although I don't know that I'm totally on an island with that. I mean, there's people that have like at least Jon Jones fatigue. If I'm trying to think, so there's a question, right? So like, to your point, do you have American fighters on there? Do you have like, what would the president want, right? That's sort of another question. What would make sense for July 4th? To be honest with you, I don't, it's so far out. I don't know how you pick that one. I think a few things have to play out between now and, let's say, even December, really the rest of the year, like the rest of the calendar year. Let's see where that plays out. And I think probably by the first quarter new year, you can begin to say, okay, here are the available pieces. This all kind of makes sense. Because honestly, dude, who the hell knows if Jon Jones is going to be available? Who the hell knows if Conor McGregor is? I mean, Conor McGregor is going to be beating 40's door down by that point. You know what I mean? Like, the notion that a year out you can count on them. I mean, maybe they will compete, right? I don't know. But it's like so speculative. It's just I couldn't give you any kind of a good answer. I think you just have to survey everything in 6 months and then start the process there.
I just got to know if they're going to put Sean Strickland on the card, because if they do, that's going to be an experience. Hey, before we get off that, our friend Jon Jones fighting at the White House, ? What was your reaction to the fans primarily being like, we don't care? Like, if I saw like a lot of people being like, you know what, Jon? Boy who cried wolf, we don't care. And I heard a lot of people sort of speculate, was it because Jon retired and he realized, hey, when you retire, people really do stop caring about you when it comes to MMA. Like, people just move on from great champions as soon as they retire. Maybe he didn't anticipate how quickly things were going to move on as soon as he retired. And he's like, let me get back in here. Or do you think he genuinely saw this and was like, oh, no, I wish I could fight at the White House? It was just an interesting situation when he put that out and people were like, moving on.
Dude, he had one of the worst retirements I've ever seen. I mean,
in all of sport, probably, right? Like,
well, I mean, think about it, right? So he's in combination, or sorry, I should say he's in company rather, with the greats. So Silva did not get a great retirement. I mean, that's a different thing. It didn't go awesome, although there was obviously some post MMA redemption with what he did in boxing to a degree. But that one didn't go great. But GSPs went pretty smoothly in terms of, like, announcing at a press conference, being celebrated, blah, blah, blah. Demetrius Johnson, obviously he's had a second life here as, commentator or creator to a degree, whatever, in the sport. And, if you consider, like, Jose Aldo's had, ups and downs, but it was still, people had fond feelings for him, and Fedor too. And, like, basically all the greats like that, except him. People, I mean, it's, of course he doesn't understand this because he has no self-awareness whatsoever, but it's very easy to understand, actually. Show of hands out there. Who enjoyed the Jon Jones heavyweight experience? And more in particular, who enjoyed the last couple of years of it? Not that many. And in fact, the very ending was extremely toxic, where, he's just out here trolling the audience and acting like or pretending that he was having the time of his life. Meanwhile, the arrest record and the life that he lives privately all indicates he's being eaten alive inside by his own demons. But putting that aside, everyone was sick of him by the time that finished. Everybody was tired of it. And so then it becomes official in the most, like, ignoble way ever. And, or certainly with the least amount of fanfare, perhaps is a better way to put it. And, immediately everyone's reaction is, ugh, good riddance, slam the door and then go move on with your life, like, done. And I think he realized finally, like, wow, like, that did not go the way I think he thought he was going to be received like some kind of hero or something. And he got treated, I mean, not like a villain per se, but just as like a gnat on a camping trip, just a nuisance. And wasting everyone's time, and again the gloating that took place. Why would anyone ever receive that well? And now he's out there being like, "Oh, guys, I'm back in the gym." Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? This guy had ample opportunity to do something and assiduously avoided every part of it. Have a nice life, Jon. You're not wanted anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I do whatever he will tell everybody he's made a bunch of money. Go enjoy it, because your company is not requested. I can assure, there's many things I know I don't speak for MMA fans on. I recognize this one. I feel pretty confident. You're not wanted anymore. You're not relevant anymore. You're not interesting anymore. You're probably not even very good anymore. And you left a sour taste in everyone's mouth. Go fuck yourself. Go have a nice life. You're not wanted. Fuck off.
Before we get off the division, it's safe to say, right? It's going to be Aspinall gone for this next fight, probably. Like, what else are we going to be doing here? Probably have to be Garn Aspinall. Then maybe you do like
probably
just keep him busy. Maybe have like a defending champion. You don't have the big names, but if he can defend frequently, maybe that's the path for Tom while they figure out who they can bring in or build up for him eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, hey, listen.
What do you do? What do you do? I don't know what you do.
I'll say this. Tom knows the score, right? You even heard Tom, I think this week at the end of last week, basically say, like, division's not exactly on fire. And then they signed Buchecha, Marcus Almeida, which I think, I don't know how that's going to go, but it's at least, you know, some sign of life that there is new blood being pumped in. And, you know, I think if he wins just a few, they're going to move him right up the food chain. So we'll see how that goes. But, you know, you got to just deal with where the division's at. The division is where the division is. And we've talked about it before. They could go get Francis, or at least in theory, they could go get Francis. I mean, whether or not they actually would, or, you know, how that could all go is different. But you got to work with what you got. But listen, at this point, I mean, beggars can't be choosers, right? Like, we have to just be glad that they're going to get this thing in rotation. I mean, that is the first order of business. Just get it in rotation. And after that, we can start to worry about some of the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Lewis is fighting this weekend. There's a real world scenario where he goes out, cuts a funny interview after he knocks out his opponent and fights, like with the DC fight. You know, there's some possibilities there. Hey, quickly, before I want to talk to you quickly about the main event of UFC 318, but before I do, I got a couple of quick fan questions. First question here from Dovey. Do you think UFC will be more or less relevant in 10 years' time? It's a good question. Like, I was trying to figure this one out, right? Peaks, valleys. We've seen people have the apex mountain and then drop down, sports struggling to survive. What do you think UFC looks like in 10 years' time? I guess this is all...
Man.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tough one. First of all, we have to see what the broadcast deal looks like, right? Is it a 5-year deal? Is it a 7-year deal? Is it a 10-year deal? These specifics matter. That's a first thing. And of course, until we have the answer to that, it's just really hard to know. Let me just also say that 10 years in our current entertainment / media environment feels like an eternity. So here's what I mean by that. Like, the way in which messages get delivered now, this has been true for some time, but it's like hyper true now, where you don't even have to say true or interesting things anymore. You just have to have the ability to command attention. And that is power. That is credibility. That is everything. Wow. Play that out 10 years forward, and what does that look like? You know, in a world where MMA was able to stand out circa, you know, the 90s and then early 2000s because it had this kind of new, interesting cachet, and it was, you know, edgy. It's not as edgy anymore. There are other things that are as edgy, or, you know, you name it. There's the how preferences change, how mood changes, how media environments change, how entertainment environments change, how technological development impacts consumer choices and changes. I also saw this guy who was writing, God, where did I see this? Maybe the New York Times. Don't hold me to that. But he was basically arguing about, he was talking about ticket prices for all of sports. I don't know, he wasn't even focused. I mean, I don't even know if he mentions UFC, but certainly this is the thing I try to tell UFC fans. It's not just UFC tickets that are expensive. I think people who get outside know that, but, you know, tickets are expensive for a lot of things now in ways that they just never were before, and almost uniformly, not quite. And what he basically argues is that people will make the claim that what that does is it alienates the fan base, and lets other people come to these shows who otherwise wouldn't be there. And that's true, but he actually took it a step further. And what he thinks that's doing, and again, this is across sports, is just eroding the concept of fandom more broadly. That people who are priced out of things that otherwise love it, it breaks a connection in them to the thing that they love, which makes letting go or finding replacements or, you know, putting it to the side much more easily. That the reason why, you know, fan bases persist in towns with like bad teams is because, well, partly, you know, the league works to make the team better over time, but there's this, it's cheap, it's accessible. You can go and get a ticket and you can live the experience of a fan there pretty easily. And if it's in your town, you don't have to take a 45-minute train somewhere to go get it. Like, these things are the things that build bonds over time. If you erode that, what happens? And then there's the last component, which is Tapology put out some data that shows that the global amount of MMA events has been in a pretty steady decline. Now, not uniformly, it's up in Japan. I think it's definitely up in Europe. I'm not sure how it is in Australia or New Zealand. I guess, historically speaking, it's certainly higher than it was, 20 years ago, but is it at its peak or not? But the three biggest markets, Russia, Brazil, and the United States, they're all in decline in terms of the number of events. What does that look like in 10 years? Right? It's really, 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 I would not make a lot of predictions. I have to tell you, these are factors I think to at least consider, but they're headwinds that the NBA faces. This is headwinds that the NFL faces, FIFA, UFC, like all, not the specifics of the decline of the events are specific to MMA, but like the other ones, these are all headwinds that everyone has to face. And I just don't know how that shakes out. I really don't.
Baseball. I was going to say, I've got the list from 10 years ago of 2015 events. Unbelievable stuff. Makes me feel old as fuck. Rousey versus Holm happened 10 years ago here in Melbourne at a stadium,
Wow.
Etihad Stadium. We had crazy fights like Aldo McGregor that year. We had Demetrius Johnson was in action that year. Jon Jones was in action that year against Daniel Cormier. We had all sorts of great fights. And
boy, I got to tell you, I don't know if I've ever done an interview with you where you the amount of like detectable malaise in your voice is as prominent as it is now. Is that it sounds, I'm very surprised to hear this.
I'm very bitter, my friend. Okay, last fan question here. Charles Oliveira, should he move to 170? This is from Evan Purdue. What do you think, Luke?
No, they're too big for him. He could win fights.
Those weight cuts are brutal, though, right? Like when they're all there praying and he looks like he's about to die. Like, I'm like, God damn.
So to me, this is what we talked about it a million times, and they won't do it because there's economic reasons behind it. But he'd be a perfect candidate for 165 if they had that, and if 170 then became 175, so you just had like the 10-pounder. He'd be an absolutely perfect guy for that weight class, and I think it would give him some new life even despite his advanced age. But the reality is, dude, these guys who are welterweights, man, when they cut down, they're just much bigger than I've seen Charles in person. Obviously, they're just much bigger than him. Not everybody, obviously. Islam is pretty similarly sized, so it's not like a 1-to-1. But he's also the best, arguably anyway, the best fighter in the sport. So it's not to say he couldn't go and win fights there, but can he go and materially change his condition, where like now he's basically, as long as Ilya is there, he's going to be locked out? Can he go and like all of a sudden go on a run at 70? I don't think so. No.